The relationship between the United States and Puerto Rico historically began on July the 25th, 1898. The United States occupied Puerto Rico on that day as the aftermath of the Spanish-American War of 1898, whereby the United States took colonial possession of Puerto Rico, Cuba, the Philippines, and Guam. The first thing the government of the United States did in Puerto Rico was to maintain a military regime. During that time, between 1898 and 1900, there were three military governors. So that set the pace for the colonial rule of the United States in Puerto Rico. In 1917, the US Congress approved the Jones Act, which is well known because it was the official act by the Congress to extend American citizenship to Puerto Ricans. On that year, 1917, Puerto Rican residents and citizens were given the option to naturalize as American citizens. So the citizenship was not given as it happened in 1940, that was birthright citizenship. Between 1917 and 1940, Puerto Ricans were required to apply for naturalization. And the naturalization process implied that Puerto Ricans had to travel to one of the states of the United States or a territory of the United States in order to go through that naturalization process. It was also possible for Puerto Ricans to serve in the military because the military allowed Puerto Ricans the capacity of using that as residency within any of the states of the United States. So some Puerto Ricans followed that path, that served in the military in order to get their American citizenship.
My grandfather is Enrique Blanco. He came from Puerto Rico, a place called Mayagüez, but he set out in 1909 to come to America. He landed in Ellis Island, and he came here alone. He was 15 years old, and he started to make a name for himself. After a few years, he understood that taking advantage of opportunities like joining the military for citizenship, and I think that's one of the things that he really, really wanted, was to gain his citizenship and set up roots in the United States. He went back briefly for a year or two, and he had come back to the States, and that's when, as a very young man, he met Florence Blanco, which is my grandmother. They met, and he knew, I think then, he wanted to set down roots in this area, but it wasn't going to be New York. So he traveled down the coastline until he found New London. He got a job on a dredge ship, and they worked in the area, and he was also, I would say, stationed or working at Fort Trumbull.
With the arrival of the United States in Puerto Rico in 1898, the United States basically transformed Puerto Rico's economy, which was before diverse in the sense that Puerto Rico's industry and economy relied heavily on three main agricultural crops: coffee, tobacco, and sugarcane. Early in the process of American intervention on the island, the sugarcane economy became dominant in the sense that many of the companies from the United States bought large extensions of land to develop sugarcane plantations, mainly on the coastal areas on Puerto Rico. And there were four main sugarcane companies that dominated basically the sugarcane economy on the island. So Aguirre was one of the main important sugarcane plantations up until the 1940s, but there were also three other sugarcane regions on the island.
I grew up in Salina. My father, he worked in the sugarcane in Aguirre, Puerto Rico, all his life. But we worked there. I mean, my father worked there. The whole community worked there. a lot of people from the outside worked there. It was a big company at that time. In 1983, when my parents came back to me and told me, "You are gonna go to the United States," I was so happy. It was the summer of 1983. When the day came, it was August 31st, and I was gonna leave early in the morning, very early in the morning. My brothers, any of my brothers, they didn't get up. They stay in bed sleeping. I went and give them a kiss and a hug, and say goodbye to them, and say goodbye to my parents. I remember this is my first time ever leaving my family, going far away. I got to the airport, we took the plane, my first time in a plane. I was very scared to death. And then we left. We took the plane and we got to New York. That's where I spent 2 months. Just there. And I used to cry every single night. Not because I made a mistake, it's because I was missing my family so much. I was old enough, I was 14, but I was still a little kid. And I miss my town, I miss my people, my friends, that I still, even to today, I talk to them. And to go to New York in this 24/7, non-stop noise, people, cars, it was a little too much for me. A lot for me that I couldn't take it at that time. And that's when I did ask my aunt to take me to Connecticut. I had more family there, and I wanted to try if it was different. I never, even to today, think that I made a mistake, because I'm very proud being here in the United States. What I got here, I'm rich in the way that I got a family, a wife, kid, grandkid, a job that I always wanted, and I'm very happy to be part of Puerto Rico and United States.
From the early 1930s, Puerto Rico's government was already organizing offices in the United States to recruit Puerto Rican workers in different areas, in agriculture, in the garment industry, in manufacturing. And this was a concerted effort by the Puerto Rican government to obviously bring trained workers to fit the demands of the American economy in those areas, in agriculture, in industries, in the garment industry. So many Puerto Ricans participated on the training that the Puerto Rican government provided.
I just want to talk briefly about how we came to New London and my family, and it really began, at least in my particular family, with my father, Jose Manuel Rivera, and I was named Manuel Jose, and I named my son Manuel Jose Jr., which broke the chain. But my father came in 1941-42. He came from Añasco, Puerto Rico. Actually, both he and my mother lived in Arecibo. They moved around in the 20s, and then they moved to Añasco. And then not Añasco is where they met, it's where they got married. And then from there to New London. But he didn't come here without a job or without a focus. It was during the war, and there was a government program, a war-sponsored government program to train welders because there was a need for welders, pipe fitters, painters, other workers, particularly for General Dynamics Electric Boat Division right here. And so he was trained to be a welder in Puerto Rico. And then he came, and then that was probably 42, 43, I don't know the exact date. And it was about a year to 2 years later, my mother came from Puerto Rico. She tells that story, how she came up actually on a boat that went to Florida. And then from Florida, they took a train, and they didn't speak any English, and they missed their stop in New London. And they ended up somewhere in the Boston area, and they had to circle back. But she came in 2 or 3 years later, 45, 46, along with my oldest sister, Grace. When we first came, and I mentioned that my father and my mother finally came 2 years later, they actually lived in a trailer near General Dynamics Electric Boat Division. and that's where a lot of the workers' families and families actually lived close to it. They were able to afford an apartment in New London on Douglas Street, which is right off of what was called Main Street. It is now called Eugene O'Neill Drive. And so we had this little apartment, 3 or 4 rooms, 3.5 rooms actually. One was in the corner of the building, and it was so cold that we never used it. So it was really a 4th room because back then, in the mid to late 50s, early 60s, there was no heat, there was no hot water, no hot water pipes, there was no bathtub, no shower. And so we had these rooms, and what kept us warm during the winter was this side blower on the stove. Late 50s, early 60s, when urban renewal was being discussed and talked about, I'm sure it might even started years earlier than that. But there came a point in time, it was around 61, 62, when they put on the front door, condemned. So for 2 or 3 years while we were living there, I had this big sign in the front door of our home that said condemned. That date finally came. It was in, I think, 63, 64, and my mother basically received a letter that said, you've got to be out in 60 days. And they gave her, I think it was a $750 check. And that was it. That was the extent of the support. I'm not saying that the homes there didn't need major upgrading or major renovation or even replacement in some areas. But the kind of renewal that they did really pushed families and residents out, and there was no support.
Operation Bootstrap was the program of economic development by the Puerto Rican government in consultation with the American government. It was implemented by law in 1947, and it was basically an attempt by both the Puerto Rican and United States governments to move Puerto Rico into a modern industrial type of economy. This is the time when the Puerto Rican government made strides in providing socioeconomic benefits to the Puerto Rican population. For example, Puerto Ricans had ready access to education, particularly higher education. They also provided ready access to health care and began to improve the infrastructural conditions of the island, like highways, transportation, the airports, and other types of conditions that allow Puerto Rico to reach this idea of modernization or modernity that the Puerto Rican government was adamant in providing. Another main result of Operation Bootstrap was the increase in migration rates to the United States. And this is the time when historians consider the Great Migration, particularly between 1945 and 1964, that led to the massive migration from the island to the United States. Many communities in the United States, including Connecticut, has its origin in this migration from the 1940s until the 1960s. And that was the result, according to many historians and historical documentation, of Operation Bootstrap, transforming Puerto Rico from an agrarian society to an industrial society. The reason seems to be, for example, the fact that industrialization is effective in the sense that it provides workers with better jobs, with better incomes, but industrialization doesn't provide jobs for everybody. Particularly in the early 1940s, the Puerto Rican population was primarily rural, primarily agrarian, and didn't have enough education in an schooling type of sense. So many of the workers at the time didn't have the skills necessary to find industrial jobs. And those rural Puerto Ricans began to find migration as an option for them to make ends meet and to raise an income with which to maintain their families.
And so my grandfather came here, they said 1948, but I'll say around 1948 to start. in kind of in the agricultural. And we hear Florida, we hear New York, but he did get around. He was a bit of a he kind of migrated to different parts of where farming was required. As you know, people come here to farm. They come here different seasons. It was at some point where he actually arrived in Connecticut, and that's kind of where the family began to build our kind of family tree here. And he settled in Old Lyme. And of all places, Old Lyme, Connecticut, at a place called Ferry Tavern. And that location, I believe it burned down in the 70s. I think you can look it up. That's where it lasted till that point. But he was kind of a back of house person, whether it was washing dishes, maybe I'll cook at some point. But that's where he started to pull men from the side of the family that said, all right, if you want to come here, you can start building your relationships locally here, try to find opportunities here, and then start looking back and say, all right, bring the wife, bring the kids, because some of the men already had families. So it was very interesting. I can only imagine what they were thinking and what they were going through, kind of the emotional disconnect from leaving your wife, your kids, and being able to kind of bet on yourself to say, I'm going to leave, I'm going to make enough money at least to send money back, take care of the family, and that when the time is right, when I have a home, a situated, a place of dwelling, I'll send for you. So my father in the 70s, he finished and graduated from Lee High School. And in 1978, he came to New London, and he was part of an employment and training that Jimmy Carter funded through the federal government. And that's how my father learned how to weld. And then from that training school that was set up, he was employed with Electric Boat. And that's how my family, my immediate family, came to New London.
Right, so my dad arrived in Willimantic, Connecticut in 1965. Mainly he arrived here because he was a migrant worker. Produce companies from Willimantic would go to Puerto Rico in his area, Barceloneta, and they were looking for workers to come to work in the produce fields. And that's what he did. So came him and his dad. So my dad's name is Efraín Domínguez Jr. and my grandfather's name was Guillermo Domínguez. So they both came, and my dad arrived here in Willimantic. Again, he was 15 years old. My mother came to Willimantic in 1968. My mom's name is Ana Luz Jimenez. She arrived because her sister and her sister's husband were living in Willimantic, and she arrived to come visit her, and she stayed. And she got a job in working in a poultry plant. After my mom was here a couple of years, she started to work in the company American Thread Company, right? And my dad was already working there. And eventually they fell in love, and eventually 3 years after that, my sister Adacil Dominguez was born, and then 2 years after my sister was born, I was born. And after 2 years, when I was 2 years old, my mom decided to return back to Puerto Rico. The reason was she missed family, her mom, her dad, her brother and sisters, they were all living, they were back in Puerto Rico. So she wanted to, be back with family, home. And also the cold weather was very brutal. So she returned back. And eventually my mom lived there for about 4 years in Puerto Rico. And then she wanted a better opportunities for, us. My brother, Efraín Domínguez, my sister, Adacil Dominguez, and then of course myself. And so she decided to come to America, but instead of coming to Willimantic, she came to London because I already had an aunt. My dad's sister was living in London. Amparo Domínguez is her name. So she just decided to come here for a better opportunity for all of us.
The Puerto Rican workers came to the United States. They faced many struggles and many obstacles to adapt to American culture and society. There were many cultural barriers, obviously, like the language, the culture, but there was also environmental situations related to the cold weather, particularly in New England, in Connecticut, obviously, in New York City, in Massachusetts. The Puerto Ricans struggle actually to cope with those demands of the weather in the United States. There were also problems because Puerto Ricans face discrimination and racism in the United States. There is enough information and documentation about how Puerto Ricans were seen, quote unquote, as a problem to American society because of that difficulty to adapt to American society. The language barriers, again, were always a problem to Puerto Ricans to relate to mainstream American society. Puerto Ricans began to organize themselves in community organizations, for example, social clubs, sports, and other types of community activities that were common for them in Puerto Rico. It was also typical for Puerto Ricans, as many other immigrants, to create their own communities, or as we say, ethnic enclaves, where they, for example, begin to create restaurants or local stores where they will have ready access to products, cuisine that they are familiar from the island.
I migrated to New London, Connecticut in 1963 with my family. At the time I was 13 years old. We moved here from Añasco, Puerto Rico. The reason that we came to New London is because I had an aunt that had lived in New London since the late 40s. We went to live at 166 Shaw Street. That was a community that the new migrants from the Caribbean seemed to be locating to and situating themselves in that neighborhood. It was a neighborhood at the time that had many Italian families. There were new African American families also moving into the community. And of course, there was the Caribbean families that came from St. Martin, Aruba, Jamaica, as well as the Puerto Ricans that were coming in. I attended the New London Public Schools. I was going into 8th grade. My experience in the school was a difficult one, and understandably so, because I was the only Puerto Rican non-English speaker in the school. There were 3 or 4 other Puerto Rican girls that attended the school, and only with the exception of one who was bilingual in both English and Spanish and helped me. I had some wonderful teachers at the middle school that understood my situation, and I had some teachers that didn't understand my situation and became very frustrated. And I found that the teachers that were more understanding and supportive, even though I wasn't really learning what they were teaching me, were the most encouraging one. I was encouraged by that one Puerto Rican student that became my friend to continue. But it was a difficult, trying time in my high school years.
Just after my senior year of college, my cousin was working with the Spanish American Cultural Organization, and we organized numerous, I wouldn't call them protests, but meetings where we would go to the school board and demand that there be more bilingual Spanish-speaking teachers in the district and in schools. So I was an advocate from an early age, and after I became superintendent in 2014, I remember telling the story how when I was getting out of Harvard with a master's, where my concentration was the teaching of reading, I could not get an interview in the New London Public Schools. They would not, I was blacklisted. And never mind getting a job, I couldn't get an interview. So it was interesting to come back to New London with all of the desire to really support all of the kids who go to our system, kids of color, kids of different backgrounds, ethnicities, and you know, and having gone through what I went through, you just never forget it.
When I got invited to serve on the Board of Education was due to the fact that one of the professors, Dr. Bill Seepis at Connecticut College, he was on the Board of Education in New London. He had won an election to serve as our state representative. So I served 6 months, and then within the 6 months I had to run a campaign, decide to run again for the C. It turns out that I came close with another candidate, classmate of mine, and we had to have a recount. And I came on top and I won. I won the election. I concentrated a lot on my community because I didn't feel that there was much support around, and there wasn't much knowledge about what my community was about. And I felt people are making decisions and they don't understand. How could they make, I would question myself all the time, how can they make decisions about these communities where they don't understand the communities, they don't understand the family structure, they don't understand the cultural aspect. But I think this was going on across the entire country when bilingual education started getting introduced. New London, was not at the front of bilingual education development. Of course, it came later for our city, but like any other new programs and communities, they were not ready to tackle this issue. So there was a lot of misconception. There was a lot of negative stuff going on about the bilingual. I wasn't really an expert in bilingual education. It was not my field. I couldn't act like I knew things about bilingual education because I really didn't. Only what I've read in the media that's going on in other cities. But I got Nuestra Casa and I got SACO behind. I got community leaders to get behind the efforts to bring in some good bilingual programs into New London to address the issues. And New London eventually, started the bilingual program.
I remember when I arrived in Puerto Rico, the first time I was getting on, on the plane. I'm older enough now, when we first came from Willamette to Puerto Rico, I was only 2 years old. But now I'm 6 years old, and I'm getting on a plane. We arrived in September of 1980. I mean, the weather was already changing. It was the fall. So we're getting near the fall already. And it was just different. You had pine trees, you had, the plants were different. You know what I mean? Here, I was used to palm trees in Puerto Rico. The weather was hot. So even the buildings, the facades, and, the architecture was different compared to Puerto Rico to here in New London. So it was, I just remember starting school. The schools were different too. I mean, the schools here were larger with more students. But the food was different. I remember in Puerto Rico, we had our rice and beans, we had that for lunch. Over here was different. You had hot dogs, hamburgers, you had pizza. And then going into the classrooms, what I was really grateful for was that I was able to understand my teachers. I arrived when I was 6 years old, so I was in first grade. And my first grade teacher was Rachel Diaz Evans in Edgerton School. And then after that, second grade, I had Miss De La Rosa. And then third grade, I had Miss Figueroa. And then fourth grade, I had Mr. Williams, because it was a bilingual program. So we had, someone that spoke Spanish, and then we had the other teacher that didn't, but always had, we were always working in groups. But the material was a little more difficult to learn. But when we were taught in Spanish, then it was easy for me to be able to just assimilate it. Being from the Puerto Rican background, I always wanted to make sure that Spanish is immersed everywhere. I mean, you go to Europe, people know 5, 6, 7 different languages. I mean, America's only English. Even though we're a nation of immigrants. So I always wanted to incorporate Spanish wherever I went. So eventually, when I became a city councilor, I started doing the Pledge of Allegiance in Spanish. Prometo lealtad a la bandera de los Estados Unidos de América, a la república que representa una nación ante Dios, indivisible, con libertad y justicia para todos.
The boom of Puerto Rican families coming in the early 70s, it was quick. It was quick, and I found that most of the communities, the families coming here, had found out about New London through families that lived in Hartford and Bridgeport, in those bigger cities, and New Haven. So New London became an attractive place, especially too with General Dynamics. At the time, they were hiring and attracting a lot of non-skilled workers that had the opportunity to be trained and learn a skill within the shipyard.
New London was just budding. There were jobs, there was training, there were people. More people started to migrate and come to New London. More Hispanics started to leave New York. Um, it was the next best thing. I remember they used to call New Connecticut the Little Apple, and everybody wanted to come here and find jobs, and there was industry. And my grandfather, still keeping with, he stayed right on track. He started working at the White House Inn, where he worked up to being a chef alongside of a melting pot of individuals in that kitchen, which made, I think, that place paramount and just put it on the map. There was French, there was Portuguese, there was Puerto Ricans. It seemed like no one spoke the same language, but they communicated excellent.
My mother worked at just several jobs throughout town until she received her education. She got her GED at Centro, and that is a very kind of special place to my family, and I'm sure to a lot of Puerto Ricans over the last generations, because Centro was what we called the Ellis Island. That's where people went to first. They had all the services. They helped you get assimilated into living in New London, finding a job, get the training that you need.
But that community was just growing so fast. I mean, there was a time when I knew every Puerto Rican that lived in New London, and then it came in time real quick. We're like, wow, who is this person? But those two agencies, Nuestra Casa and Saco Centro now, became very vital wings of our Puerto Rican community in New London, because Puerto Ricans would come to New London and they would know about Saco Centro, Nuestra Casa, before they even arrive here. Nuestra Casa was established by the Catholic Diocese and St. Mary's Church. And in there, what they offer were more educational programs like English strengthening skills, high school preparation, diploma preparation, GED classes. So when SACO, the Spanish American Cultural Center, was kind of a different group that wanted to meet different needs in the community. That's when it became the social services piece and it became the cultural piece. So when you went to SACO, you saw that's where they had the people doing the social worker, the advocacy, helping people find housing, finding resources for food and money and all those kinds of things, as well as having the cultural events with children, celebrating holidays, giving dances in the center.
Our staff were bilingual, bicultural, and they would help anyone who comes to the doors. You don't have to be Hispanic. Because it says Centro de la Comunidad, which means the community center, and non-Latinos would come and we would help them too. We would help whoever comes through the doors. That's what we were able to do, and we feel proud of that. My parents went and they went to Nuestra Casa to learn English and also to learn GED, and it was done in Spanish. And at Centro, my mother decided to go for a CNA program that was provided at Centro de la Comunidad, and she, along with other Latinas, Hispanic women, they were able to study for CNA, and most of the people came from different countries, Latino countries. It wasn't an easy course, but she did it with the other women, and they all graduated. And that's my brother and I were younger. We went to see her at her graduation, and we said, "Mom, we're proud of you." The Centro de la Comunidad is now closed since COVID. We had to close the agency. It does need a lot of maintenance repair. The building is very old, and we're hoping to open again once we restore the inside of the agency so that we can continue providing the services needed in our Latino community.
In 1977, a missionary pastor from Uruguay, Pastor Presa, and his family came to this remote place of New London. According to what they said to me, when I met them. But Noemi, their daughter, still in our church. They came in 1977 to establish this mission here in First Baptist New London as a part of an effort to reach out to Latinos community in New England. What I know is they got together as a family for 5 years and no one showed up to the services. And for 5 years, and they were about to throw the towel. And that morning, the first person came to their doors. And it was Doña Julia, which is the oldest member of the church. She is with the Lord now. And they saw in Doña Julia hope to keep going. And that was the beginning. Then people start coming, and the first congregants, most of them, I would say 97% were people from Puerto Rico. That was not the first Latino church in the area. The first was the Pentecostal Church in Jefferson.
Then in 2000, Reverendo Daniel Martino came all the way from Puerto Rico. So he came there and he was the pastor. He was there, the pastor in the 68 Smith Street. And in that particular year, the government decided to do the eminent domain. So the church was forced to move from that property. In that process, they are thinking of building a new church in that process. So they have to move once again back to the First Baptist Church in New London while they're in the process of figuring out what to do and also to build a new building. So in 2002, they do the celebration, the inauguration of the new church there in the Reading Avenue. So from here, from the First Baptist Church in New London to the 68th Smith Street, back again here to the First Baptist Church in New London, then to the Reading Avenue. And they stayed there almost for 10 years. A new church, a building that with a lot of efforts, with many help of the community and other churches that saw the first Hispanic church building a church from the ground. So in 2012, Reverend Martino reached out to the pastor of First Baptist Church of New London, merged and come back here. So then they merged as the Church of the City. Church of the City is a church that we say we are a church in the city for the city. So we're constantly looking ways to get connected and serve our community. One of the most important ministries of things that we do that even in the pandemic we continue to do is that every single Saturday, 180, 150 meals, hot meals are served every single Saturday from 5 to 6 p.m. Other things that we do as a church is that we have an organization that is started in the church. It's called IASC. They give a little legal advice to immigrants, and in the process they help them. It started as a ministry of the church, but now it's a non-profit organization that is in our buildings.
We accommodate the first effort of higher edge, what we call higher edge, college access at the beginning with Grissel. He came to us, he knocked on our doors, and he was looking to establish this beautiful vision for first generation students that needed help to get to college. And we didn't have the money, we didn't have the resource for him, but we had the space. And I say, Chris, this is what we have. We have a beautiful space, we have computers, we have a place that you can start operating your vision, and that's why we birthed Higher Edge back in 2011. And years ahead, you know, they got their own 501c3, and now we look back and we see how many students have been blessed for that vision that not just him, but the church has, and we combine both efforts.
My mom and dad were real sticklers for making sure that you knew, A, how to provide for yourself, take care of yourself, but you also knew some of our traditional dishes. Keep them in your house. Let your kids know what the types of foods and how to make them. Keeping tradition around and alive was big. We listened to Spanish music. My cousins and aunts would come from New York. Oh boy, fire up the old console. They were dancing in the living room, and there's food on the stove, and you would think it was a holiday, but they enjoyed spending time together because they came from far and wide. The Panamanian side of the family, the my uncle Keke, and my dad's side of the family, which resided in New York, they'd come down and it would just be a big picnic. Riverside Park, Bateswood Park in New London were gathering spots, places, 4th of July, where you would go and you would just salsa, and there were people out there with instruments playing live, and you learned there was so much culture and history floating around on these holidays. It was incredible. Great time to grow up in New London.
Yo me llamo Elba Nieves Navedo. Llevo aquí en New London desde el 2006, junio del 2006. Soy puertorriqueña del pueblo de Tuabaja. Mi negocio se llama El Punto Exacto LLC. Está ubicado en la 121 Montauk Avenue. Es un negocio que emprendimos mi esposo y yo junto con mi hijo. Nos dedicamos más a traer dos culturas, la cultura puertorriqueña, un poco del sazón puertorriqueño y un poco del sazón dominicano, para que todas esas personas que se encuentran aquí en el pueblo de New London puedan disfrutar de esos sabores. Mi madre y mi padre ya fallecido, mi madre, gracias al Señor, todavía está con nosotros, Carlos Nieves y Elba Navedo. Ellos siempre se pasaban cocinando, los vecinos le pedían que cocinaran y eso me motivó a seguir con la cocina, y gracias a Dios siempre me dicen que tengo un buen sazón, y decidí empezar a cocinar. Y pues las muchachas del trabajo me decían, cocina hoy, y cocinaba y eso. Luego me encuentro a ese gran hombre, mi esposo, José Conde, y pues él era chef. Y de ahí nos unimos y gracias al Señor pudimos lograr establecer nuestro establecimiento, El Punto Exacto. Dos culturas unidas para el deleite de tu paladar. Siempre yo he querido que las personas, cuando vienen a probar nuestro diferente menú, a mí siempre yo le digo a las personas que me encanta que cuando prueben los diferentes platos, ese plato lo transporte a su país. Y no hace ni 5 días vino una vecina de aquí, de alrededor del negocio, y me pidió un sándwich. Ese sándwich que ella me lo pide y me dice, pero yo quiero que esos sándwiches que hacen en Puerto Rico bien rico, de jamón y queso, y dame jamón y queso solamente con tomate, y le ponen un poquito de mayonesa. Y luego que ella se fue, me envía un mensaje y me dice, wow, me sentí allá en Puerto Rico. Esas cosas pues nos inspiran y me agradan. Eso es lo más que me gusta. Que cuando prueben cada plato, ese plato le haga sentir aquel restaurante, aquel negocio, la casa de abuela, la casa de mamá, cuando lo comieron allá en su país.
I fulfilled the dream of my grandparents. I fulfilled the dream of my parents to be in the position that I'm in. All their sacrifice was hope. That's what most of the generations to see the lineage just get better. So me being in the position that I am as a director of economic development is a dream. You know, a little kid that grew up down the street on Elm Street with a learning disability and going through the school systems, never knowing that one day all those sacrifices and that hard work would put me in a position that I am now. So the hope is that we still continue to see it get better. And there is this underlying hope that we start to see Puerto Rico grow and flourish and be respected and treated as a citizen, as people who have sacrificed and are part of the military and are thinkers, entrepreneurs, inventors, have amazing history. That hope is still there, not just for the people that live here, but the people that are still there and part of this beautiful island that we call home as well.
My father said, because he died in 2012, before he died, he said, I love Puerto Rico. That was my home. But he did the best he could here in London, Connecticut. And he was very grateful for all that was offered to him and my family. And he said, I've learned to accept everything in London when it came to the education. His first thing is to continue your education. That was the first priority. Get a good job and do the best that you can. And I'm so proud of my dad and my mom that they continued on. They didn't give up. They found a way to continue on with what they were striving for, the best for themselves and also my brother and I.